Huh, look at this. Suddenly, the news is full of this new information. Reuters, The Guardian, CNN. Turns out that unless you're old or infirm or, no offense intended, fat, there was never any reason for you to fear COVID 19. A year in lockdowns, tens of thousands of businesses destroyed, all of the performing arts kicked to the curb. And now we find this out? Here's the story from the Washington Post. Quote, the vast majority of global coronavirus deaths occurred in nations with high levels of obesity, according to a report linking overweight populations with more severe coronavirus related illness and mortality. The report by the World Obesity Federation found that 88% of deaths due to COVID 19 in the first year of the pandemic were in countries where more than half of the population is classified as overweight, which it defines as having a body mass index, BMI, above 25. Obesity, generally defined as BMI above 30, is associated with particularly severe outcomes. Among the nations with overweight populations above the 50% threshold were also those with some of the largest proportions of coronavirus deaths, including countries such as Britain, Italy, and the United States. Some 2.5 million people have died around the world of COVID 19, more than 517 of which were in the United States. Unquote. Some of us knew about this 9 months ago. I remembered seeing something from Johns Hopkins way back when I was on their site almost every day. I looked for it and found it. It's not like they were hiding this. Let's dig down a little bit and read the explanation, which is unusually clear and forthright. This was written by Johns Hopkins senior writer, Katie Pierce. Quote, what factors might explain why the COVID 19 risks are higher with obesity? One is based on physics. People with substantial obesity, say a BMI over 35, are carrying a lot of excess weight, mostly in their abdomen, below the diaphragm. You move your diaphragm toward your feet every time you breathe, and if you have an extra 80 pounds or more to move, that makes breathing harder. This would be true really for any respiratory disease. With COVID 19, we're also seeing that the membranes separating the lung airway sacs and blood vessels surrounding them become leaky, allowing fluid to enter the airways. This makes it hard to get oxygen from the air to the blood. So the diaphragm has to work even more, and obesity restricts this. Inflammation is another factor. Fat itself is metabolically active, and it produces a fair number of pro-inflammatory molecules called cytokines, which are a type of immune protein. You remember the cytokine storm everybody was talking about? The story continues. It's as if your body is kind of battling itself continuously. A little war caused by signals released from fat cells, which the immune system responds to, producing a low level of background inflammation. So if you are obese, this is the baseline. Now, you superimpose a bigger battle with a novel virus that the immune system has not seen before, and it becomes hyperactivated. That's not going to be a good combination. She's a good writer. She goes on. Another area that I believe deserves more study is the role of the ACE2 protein in fat cells. This protein is key for the COVID 19 virus since the virus must bind to it in order to gain entry into a cell. It turns out fat cells express ACE2 at fairly high levels. There are some past data on this related to other respiratory viruses that they can attack fat, last in fat, and shed more slowly from fat. This could make an obese individual more infectious even as their symptoms get better. Close quote. That was from June 1st. Doesn't that sound like science? Science that makes predictions based on data and logic? Why is this a top story now? And why wasn't this a top story then? It's almost as if they wanted lockdowns to continue past the election and the inauguration and then taper off. They had also been working their favorite election year angle since at least April of 2020, the racial angle, telling us that Black and brown people were in greater danger from coronavirus. I remember because that was in our minds when the George Floyd demonstrations started. He died on May 25th. Remember us noting that it was particularly callous for Democrats to encourage shoulder to shoulder protests if people of color were at greater risk from COVID? What did they know that they weren't telling us? Maybe that young, healthy protesters were at almost zero risk? They just kind of eased off of a weak racial narrative and onto a stronger racial narrative, didn't they? I mean, you can't tear up cities because you're mad at a virus. So have they now dropped the COVID kills black and brown people more often narrative? Not at the Washington Post, they haven't. Let's go back to the WAPO article we started with. Quote, in some cases, the correlations between coronavirus severity and weight are also tied to racial and ethnic inequality. In the United States, Hispanic and non-Hispanic Black adults have a higher prevalence of obesity and are more likely to suffer worse outcomes from COVID-19, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Close quote. How is that racial and ethnic inequality? If being heavy is the risk factor and Blacks and Hispanics are more often heavy, then them dying more often is equality. Same health condition, same risk outlook. Unless we suspect systemic force feeding. Last time I looked, India was chock full of people of color, and their deaths peaked and fell off. Maybe because they ran out of chubby Indians. How about Vietnam? Why has the entire continent of Africa had fewer deaths than Great Britain? These are not white people, they're skinny people. And if their healthcare systems were anything close to as good as ours, they'd have done even better. Ask Japan or Taiwan. This whole thing has been a manipulation at every level. How will we ever forgive the powers that be for making everybody into a victim of a pandemic that would otherwise have never affected them? Why would they do this? Because they didn't want to be seen as unsympathetic to the old and ill? Because they didn't want to be accused of fat shaming? Or maybe because an international political agenda was interested in testing compliance levels. I'll let you be the judge. After all, I'm not a doctor. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel and then click the little bell to get notifications.